welcome to the session. Here, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Zoom or have used Zoom before. So I have like a quick slide for you to kind of know how to navigate this tool as a participant. So as you can see on the top left corner of your screen, should be like right here, you'll see there's a mute and a mute button, and you can start and stop your video. For most of the time, we can stay muted, and then if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask a question. Or on the number 2 of the participants tab, you can also raise a digital hand. So that's another thing, that if you choose to use Zoom to administer, like teach a class with your students, you can kind of inform them that under that participants tab, they can raise a digital hand, and I'll be able to see like that you're trying to talk to me. The other thing is there's a chat window. So if you click on the chat button, you'll be able to send questions throughout. There will be a couple of breaks during the presentation I'm going to give you to kind of address some of the questions that you might have. And we're going to have a longer Q&A at the end. But anytime if you have a question, just post it there. We'll be moderating and then answering as they come. And then there's 2 ways that you can kind of see what's happening. On the very top, like that number 5, there's gallery view, where you can see everybody at once, or you have speaker view. So whoever is saying something will be bigger on the screen. So it's whatever you feel comfortable using, you just put it there. But you can send questions through the chat or go ahead and ask any questions throughout. I'm happy to answer. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is the Essentials for Exams, Assignments, and Final Project session. My name is Addie Tolliver. I'm a senior instructional designer at the Center for Teaching Excellence. So my job is to actually help professors teach better and help them with course design and improve their teaching practices in face-to-face and online courses. You have seen that there's a lot of other trainings out being offered by OIT and CTE together. This is not so much a tech-centric session. This is more the pedagogy behind exams, assignments, and final projects, and kind of what you need to do with this transition to online. So yes, we're going to be talking about some tech-specific tools, but it's not a how-to for all of them. There will be other sessions that will be more how-tos, or kind of give you a more comprehensive view into those tools and teach you how to use them. But this is kind of more like the pedagogy and the teaching behind it. So it's something that you need to keep in mind as you are moving forward. This is the overview of our session. So we're going to be talking about evaluating student learning and work. We're going to be talking about learning objectives and assessment strategies, considerations for teaching online and like this transition that has been, imposed upon us, and modifying traditional assessment practices to the online environment. So we are going to have some time at the end that you can have specific questions or have specific scenarios they can ask about things that are specific to your class. This session has been designed to be pretty broad and kind of address most courses and most type of teaching, but there's always some specific questions that you might ask, and we will have time at the end. And I think having all of you guys together is a good way also for us to crowdsource like different methodologies and different ways of doing things. So if you think of something specific, we can have a big conversation at the very end. So to get started, we're going to be talking about evaluating your students' work. So this is an interesting conversation, right? You already know kind of how to evaluate your students in a face-to-face class. And you might be doing this stuff normally, but you might not know kind of the nomenclature and the different ways that kind of we categorize the evaluation of student work. And if you have taken, teaching and learning courses or pedagogy courses, some of these terms might be familiar to you, but if you haven't, you might not have heard them before. So there's different ways you can kind of evaluate your students, and we'll talk about them right now. The first one, you can do a pre-test, right? So a pre-test is evaluating what the students know before starting a topic. So oftentimes we might do a pre-test as the class starts and kind of see where they stand, and we might make some changes into the curriculum to address some of the stuff that they don't know, and we might be able to kind of skip some of the things they already know. They have learning other courses. We do this a lot. The other thing is the idea of formative assessments, which is a pedagogical term that you might not have heard of. So formative assessments are the things that you do to check on the progress of how your students are learning. So these are often low stakes opportunities. And I love sharing this analogy that is really helpful and hopefully will give you kind of the visual, right? So if you think about teaching as cooking, so the formative assessment, imagine if you're the cook and you're cooking a soup. So as you're cooking that soup, you might be tasting the soup throughout as you're putting the seasonings to see if the soup needs more salt, more pepper, you know, more other seasonings, a little more spice, something like that. So if a guest comes into your kitchen and they taste the soup and is not seasoned properly, they're not gonna be, you know, super mean to you or think that you're a horrible cook. They understand that the cooking is a process and you're not done yet. So they might give you some feedback and say, hey, this needs a little more salt. So you can put a little more salt and then kind of really season it to perfection. So that's what formative assessment is. So these are the small quizzes, the small activities that throughout the course you can give to your students, or you know, you might scaffold a particular project. So it could be a draft of a paper, it could be an outline of a group presentation or something. Those are opportunities that you give to your students to show where they're going, but you are still going to give them feedback and have that expectation that with the feedback things will get better. And the other option is the idea of summative assessment. So summative assessment, you evaluate kind of what students have learned. So this is a little more high stakes. And this is basically, you know, as you have cooked the soup and you're actually going to be serving it to your friends. So they're going to be tasting it and you're done with it. So they might taste and say, oh, this is a really good soup, or it might suck, right? So they can see like, can you cook or can you not cook? And they might give you feedback, but you know, at the end, it's like, unless you start cooking from scratch, it is what it is, and you show it all you got. So, and so these are the different ways that you can kind of assess your students. As you are assessing your students, you need to think about the learning objectives and make sure that you're always thinking of these assessment strategies and how they align with the learning objectives that you have for your course. So if you think about the course and kind of the course development cycle is very similar from a or should be very similar from a face-to-face course and an online course. In fact, there's a course design method called backward design that is kind of like a tried and true good design model that kind of ensures that there's alignment between the learning objectives that you have for your course and the instructional activities and the assessments that you require your students to have. So we're in a very unique situation, right? So we've been doing the traditional teaching up to this point, and whether you have designed this course yourself or if the course has been given to you, like if you have been given a syllabus or something, you for sure have specific learning objectives for your course. So there's two different types of learning objectives that you're going to see, right? There are some that are related to university curriculum. There's some learning objectives that might have been listed also in the catalog. And there's some learning objectives that you might have created in addition to the stuff that was in the catalog and the UC objectives. So what you have to think in mind as we kind of move forward with this transition of teaching online is that we need to look at these objectives that have been approved for your course and make sure that we meet them from this point on until the end of the semester. And there might have been some activities that you already have in your class that allowed you to meet some of these objectives, but there might be some other ones that you have not. So as you're thinking about these learning objectives, you need to be thinking about the assessments that the students will complete to demonstrate to you that they're meeting those learning objectives, right? So a lot of the assessments that you have designed at the start of the semester that have been designed for you they will still continue as usual. You're still going to be able to do them normally. But for some of those assessments, you might not be doing them business as usual. You're going to have to make some modifications. And we're going to give you some examples later on in the presentation on how to modify some of these. But as you're thinking about the course development cycle, it's important for you to think about your learning objectives first and look at those overall learning objectives and think about what are the current assessments that I had or the current assessments that I've had so far. Have they met those learning objectives? If not, what can I do now assessment-wise, or what can I require my students from now on assessment-wise for them to show that they have met those overall course objectives? So that is super important. From there, then you can really think about the instructional activities that you're going to be doing to make sure that they can do all of that. So keep those learning objectives in mind, and that's your priority to then decide the assessments. And then we're going to be thinking about the instructional activities. So the instructional activities are like, are you going to be doing lectures in Zoom, something similar to this, right? Where you might be sharing a PowerPoint, you might be talking to your students. Or are you going to be recording the lectures yourself and then post it into Canvas or Box so that the students can watch it at their own time, and then they might be answering some questions. So you're going to be thinking about that throughout. So there are a couple of things, though, that we need to consider for this online transition. And there are very important things before we kind of talk about the assignment specifically or the assessment specifically. And we're going to go over these. So these are some considerations. The first one, and this is very, very important, is that online education has many formats. As we're moving on with this transition, we're not asking you to create an online course, okay? This is what you're doing is not creating an online course. In fact, to create an actual online course, the process would have been completely different than this. What we're trying to do is make a change based on a scenario that came out of left hand. We're just making an adaptation to make sure that we can keep the operations in place as much as possible and keep the students learning as much as possible through a time of crisis. So online education is a different beast. So don't feel like you are pressured to create an online course right now. That's not what's happening. We're going to make the best out of the situation. And attending the session, attending all the other training sessions, there will be a lot of staff to give you support. We're going to be here to help you out. So take a deep breath, and you can do this. We're confident you can do it. But don't think that this is an online course. It's going to be different. So as we move to this online format, you might consider alternate approaches to evaluate your students, okay? So there are some things that you might not be able to do. So for that, we're going to have to be a little more creative, and we're going to have to be a little more, have a little bit of ingenuity to think about how we can meet those very important learning objectives for your course. So it might be something completely different that you do. And we're going to give you some options of what to do in that place. You need to make sure that you communicate these changes with your students early and often. So communication is going to be key from now on. You might need to make some changes. At every step of the way, you're going to be communicating with your students and let them know what the expectations are. And the same way that I feel like a lot of you guys, have a little bit of anxiety about this process, your students will be in the same boat. We're all in the same boat, but we're all going to go through this together. I'm confident. So part of this communication with your students is that for the next couple of weeks, if you have a chance, sit down, you're going to create a revised schedule or revised syllabus. Updating the students with all the chances in the course or changes in the course, and if there are due date changes or any adaptations, if you're going to substitute some of the assignments for others. Try to make a 2-week schedule, revised schedule, and give that to the students. We don't know how everything is going to go after 2 weeks. I think that we have learned so far that this is a very volatile and ever-changing situation. Things are changing by the minute. So we're going to take care of 2 weeks, and at the end of those 2 weeks, you can kind of revise something for the next 2 weeks and see how that goes. But, keep the students updated if they have any questions, answer any questions that they might have. The other thing is very important. You need to communicate the grades with the students. Whether you're a Canvas user or not, that's very important. So I put in parentheses the Canvas gradebook, because Canvas is an excellent tool. It allows the students to authenticate into the system. When you offer them the grades, they can see their grades in their own profile. It's FERPA compliant, is a great tool. But you might not be using Canvas at all. So it doesn't matter, just communicate the grades to your students. One of the FERPA regulations is that we cannot just share every student's grade with everybody in the class. So you shouldn't put your whole grade book available for everybody to see and see each other's grades. But you can communicate with the students individually and let them know where they stand, and then kind of communicate kind of the changes moving forward. So that's one of the things that you can do and you should do to make things a little easier for your students and know where they stand and what they have to do from now on for their grades. If you are planning on conducting synchronous classes, it'll be important to keep them at the regular class times, just because technically the students should have that time kind of blocked. The only thing that you need to keep in mind that some students might have gone back home, so they're in different time zones and they might not attend at the same time. So if you have, on the previous session, one of the faculty members, he teaches an 8 a.m. class, and he has some students in the West Coast. So it will be really hard for their students to attend that. So you can always record the sessions. You just be lenient with time zones. We don't know if our students are already sick. So they might, be facing sickness, or they might be caring for a family member that is sick. Whether they're not sick now, but they might become in the next few weeks. We don't know. We'll knock on wood, of course. We want everybody to stay healthy, but that is just a reality that we're dealing with. So the main, I guess, lesson in this is that you need to be compassionate. Be compassionate. Be, lenient. I'm not saying that give leeway for them not to show up. If there's certain circumstances, try to work with them as much as you can and make the best out of the situation. And make sure to consider accessibility for the course. And when we talk about accessibility, there are a couple of things that we talk about. The first one is that if you have a student that has a disability in your class, and we know of that disability, we need to make sure that we're also looping in the DAS office in the conversation to see the best ways to make sure that we're addressing that and we're providing the student with all the information they need and all the resources they need. The other thing is we need to make sure that all students have access to the information that we provide. So right now is not a time in the semester to request that they order more books or they get to things that they might not get in touch with. And we're hoping that the students were able to take their textbooks and things, to their homes, but they might not have, been able to. We need to make sure that as much as possible, the students have the materials that they need to complete their activities. So try to work with them and don't assign anything extra that will be very hard for them to get to or acquire. So I'm not saying don't assign more readings. If there's a particular PDF that you're planning on sharing with your student, of course, share with that PDF. You are able to give it to them and stuff. That's not going to change things a lot, but it's just because we're not doing this, order this additional book. Let's just not do that and be considerate. So things that you should think about if you really want, need to redesign parts of your course, right? So this is, there are activities that you have already created and that already allowed you to meet some of those learning objectives, wonderful. But there are some that you might not have yet. So if you're really thinking about revamping your activities, these are some things that you should consider. The first one is kind of relocating the weighing of the assignment. What I'm saying is not add more points for something, but maybe something's going to be worth more percentage-wise, and then to minimize the weight of the remaining work. And this is very important when we're thinking about the summative assessment versus the formative assessment. If 40% of your grade was that final exam. And it's kind of hard for us to fully maintain, you know, academic integrity or kind of establish academic integrity on something like that. Maybe you might be really thinking about reweighting some of the stuff and giving other assignments a little more weight than that final exam. Something to consider. You should resist adding in assignments or like kind of busy work. We don't want additional burdens to you or the students on more work to do, right? So it's a matter of efficiency. Let's try to be efficient on how we're going to get to those learning objectives and meet those learning objectives for the course. So, and we need to make sure also to give ways for the students to kind of make up some of those lower grades early in the semester, in the latter part of the semester, as much as we can. I'm not saying, you know, every single activity, but, you know, let's think of ways that they can also meet those objectives and kind of show to you they're actually learning or doing something to improve their grades. So that's another thing, like rather than having that high stakes summative assessment and activity at the very end of the course, consider breaking that down. Break down into smaller activities that potentially could give feedback for your students and they can improve as much as possible. Some subject matters, it's kind of hard to do that stuff, but some, you know, with a little creativity, you're able to do that. So instead, especially because then you don't have to worry about having to manage that exam at a distance, which might be very challenging. Now, there's a couple of notes here. When you make these changes, we need to make sure that we're really communicating this with the students and communicate a lot. And know also that Canvas, our learning management system, has the capability to support exams. We have a few trainings available today and tomorrow. And even after the trainings, there will be some recordings for you to also watch if you want to do this on your own. There's a lot of resources out there. It is not super, super, super hard to put a Canvas exam together. The hardest part is actually to come up with the questions and the options, right? Which a lot of the times you already have those. So it takes some time to put them in the system, but once they are in the system, they will be able to be reused. So as you're thinking about this transition, all the work that you're putting now is not going to go to waste because you actually will be able to use this information for the future. Once things go back to normal, a lot of the stuff will be there and that can be reused. So don't feel like it's a waste of time. It's actually a wonderful opportunity to make some improvements to your course, and then we'll have that for the future. So we're thinking about, before we go into the modifying assessments in the environment, I'm gonna go in with a question I think that Chris put in. He's saying that the weighing issue is difficult because I have some students who got off a bad start and need the rest of the points, and decreasing the weight of the late material will disproportionately hurt them. And that's true. So if you feel that that's going to be something that will hurt your students, that's not the best choice for your class. So you need to be looking at your course, your students, and see if you can do it. Especially if you feel like most of your students have met the learning objectives at the beginning, that could be used. Right, Chris? Is that something that's happening in your course?
Yes. So I do have students that are in very different positions right now, and some who got off to a great start would love to kind of bank those points and would love to have the later material weighted a little bit lower. The ones that got off to a not great start are really kind of needing to do well and get the full weight of those late points. It isn't like the class, it's some of the students are going to benefit, some are going to be disadvantaged. So it's always trying to figure out how to.
Yeah, it's a balance. You need to work with your students and you need to work with the situation that you have. So it just absolutely, I'm not saying these like you should consider these if that's an option, right? But yes, absolutely work with your students and see what works best for your class, but also making sure that we're meeting those learning objectives. So if you feel like even up to this point, your students haven't been able to meet those learning objectives, maybe you can create other opportunities for them to kind of show it or improve those earlier grades, you know?
Right. Thanks.
So do we have any other questions so far?
Elaine, I have a question, Greg Summers. Are we in a position where essentially you know, a lot of times there's an issue of you don't want to go back and change the syllabus because that's the contract. And as soon as you start that, you've opened Pandora's box and then anything goes up for grabs. Are we in a position where we're really living in a different world where honestly we can almost selectively adjust pieces and say other pieces still remain non-negotiable, that kind of a thing?
So my understanding is that communication is key. I think that you need to communicate with your students. Don't make any drastic changes. I think that if you like cancel every single assessment now, that would not be okay. But if you are making changes and changing some of the latter assessments to something else, you can communicate with your students and just give, very detailed instructions about those. I think that that's still within your rights as the instructor, and just need to make sure that we're meeting those learning objectives that were set for that course. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm not saying like completely scratch everything that you have done, but given the current situation that we have, it's trying to address the remainder of the semester. There are some things, for instance, that some faculty members just cannot do. Like if you're teaching a lab class, or if you're teaching a studio class or something, that you don't have access to the studio anymore. So there are some things you're going to have to do to adapt to not having the necessary things that you would have for these remainder assessments. So yes, if you're thinking about that, absolutely you can change it to address those and make sure to communicate with your students. And even for those particular classes, especially the studios, the labs, I know that they're the deans and department chairs, they're in conversations about addressing those issues specifically. And I know that shortly they will be communicating directly with those faculty of how to move forward in those particular situations. But the whole idea is, if you have, for instance, a final exam that is worth, 40% of your grade, and you only had like a midterm before spring break, you might consider maybe doing something else or something in addition to that final exam, because as we can tell, there are ways for us to administer the exam electronically, but it's not kind of ideal because, maintaining academic integrity is something challenging. It is not impossible, but it's challenging. So there might be other ways that we can just rethink how we're going to be assessing the students at the end of the term. And we can just, just communicate what the changes will be. And, as we're thinking about the next session of this presentation, we're going to give you some kind of examples of how you can modify some of your assessments in the online environment. And at the very end of the session, when we have like a bigger Q&A, then we can really talk about, specific examples for each and every one of you. And then we can go from there. Does that make sense?
Let's see where we head at.
Excellent. Okay, so here are some of the different examples of how you can modify some of these assessments in the online environment. So we try to give you a pretty uncomplicated way of doing these things. Of course, the learning management system can do most of these things. Not all faculty are using the learning management system. So we need to kind of consider there some, and I'm going to give you even some very low-tech options of those same, results in, moving forward. So the first one, if you think about different things that you might assess your students, so classroom participation might be one of them, right? So we have a few recommendations and some tools that you might need as you are assessing classroom participation. The first one, as an option, you can freeze participation grade. That's one way they can kind of look at participation. It's kind of a drastic way, but like I think it was Joseph mentioning, or Chris, like you have to really take in consideration how your students have been doing so far, right? So if some students have not been participating much and their grades really will be affected, this might not be the best option for you. Also, like there are other ways that the students can still participate in the class. So you might not need to freeze it. You might provide them with other opportunities to participate, which might be, for instance, using some discussion boards on online chats. So all the tools that we're going to be talking about in this presentation are tools that SMU is currently paying for, and you're going to have some tech support on, and you're going to have some trainings, and you're going to have an opportunity to get people to kind of guide you on how to use it and do the best you can. So Canvas, for instance, has a wonderful discussion boards that you can use, but you can also do online chats. Canvas has a chat function, and depending on the tools that you're comfortable with, that your students might be comfortable with, you can even use external tools that are not the ones that we're going to be listing here, right? So there are other chat options. There are other ways that you can kind of communicate with the students and participate. The other option is you can submit notes and reflect. The students can submit notes and reflections for credit. So if you are teaching a seminar class where you're going to have like a book discussion or something, instead of doing that synchronously, if you have a lot of students that, you know, are in the East Coast, West Coast, whatever, that they cannot participate synchronously in their sessions, but you still want them to share their thoughts about, you know, a book or an activity, they can just, you know, create Word docs and submit those notes and reflections in a very low-tech way. And you can give credit for synchronous meeting participation. So if you are running your meetings in Zoom like I am right now, and we are having a discussion, you know, you can say, hey, unmute yourselves and we can have a conversation. This can be a little hard, right? If you have a class that is more than 50 students, having a Zoom session might be hard, but there's an option of doing breakout rooms in Zoom. So the students can be talking in smaller groups, and then as the instructor, you can kind of be hopping from one room into the next. So it's something that you can consider, but you can still kind of observe the students and see how they're participating. So you don't have to freeze the participation, it's just thinking about the participation in different ways. So the tools that are needed, right? Zoom. So if you're running the presentation, or if you're just running a lecture or something in Zoom, the students can either participate by talking to you and doing the chat function, so on. There's ways for them to be able to kind of share their thoughts about the topic, but they can also email you those notes or reflections. And you can use Canvas discussion boards. Canvas discussion boards are not like the end all and be all. As far as like discussion tools goes, they're pretty meh, but they work pretty well. They can meet some of the learning objectives. You can post videos. You can even record yourself. If you don't want to do the synchronous Zoom meeting, you can record your lectures and post it as in the instructions for the discussion board and pose some questions there. And then the students can watch that lecture at their own time and then respond at their own time. So it's actually works very well and will allow you to kind of evaluate the students pretty decently. So I recommend that. The other thing is, like, if you have homework, if you're teaching a course that is homework heavy, what are you gonna do? How are you gonna get this? Recommendation, you can do online submissions, right? So you can set that up in the learning management system. And you can also think about truncated online submissions, meaning that if you have a lot of homework, right, it might be a lot for you to kind of give back on every single thing that they do, but you can ask them to just submit only the stuff that really shows that they have met the course objectives. So, so it would take some thinking on your end based on your subject matter that you teach on how that is going to work, but you're basically only requiring them to submit to you the stuff that really demonstrates to you that they have met those learning objectives. And that can be a lot easier for you to manage and for the students to submit. So some of the tools that you would need, really simple. You can just ask them to email them to you. You can use Canvas assignments, which is a little more advanced tool. But the beautiful thing about the Canvas assignments is that if the user has an account, like a student has an account, when they submit, it gets attached to their kind of profile within the electronic system. With email, all the stuff that we're going to talk about can be done via email. My recommendation is that if you're using some sort of like organization structure for your email, right? Instead of having all this stuff come in on the main inbox, there are ways for you to kind of set up folders and create some rules, like depending on how, depending on the subject line of the email for them to send to a particular folder. So this is kind of a low-tech strategy with email so that you can kind of keep yourself organized. And we can put some of that documentation with the CTE website, but I'm happy to share with you. And there will be a lot of resources coming up for you on the smu.edu Keep Teaching website. So all of this stuff can be done with really low tech. The other thing, student presentations, right? So a lot of you might be assessing your students' oral communications or whatever, working in groups as part of UC curriculum. A couple of things that you can do. You can use Zoom and the students can present during a synchronous meeting. So there are a couple of things that you can do as a Zoom host. You can share the ownership and allow other students to host it, and every single one that's part of the set is you can allow them to share their screen. So anybody could go and click on the share button and share whatever PowerPoint presentation that they would have, or share the screen itself, and they could present on whatever they were going to present in class. It might be harder if they had like a poster or something. It's not impossible, but they can use this to kind of continue presenting as they would in class. Or they can record their presentations and they can upload the videos to you. So they don't have to do this synchronously, but they could also do at their own time. There are some benefits of allowing them to do it at their own time is that you could allow them, like they can record themselves and re-record themselves multiple times, which can improve the product, I guess. The recording can be better. But if you're evaluating maybe like oral communication or something and you want them to do it live or something, if you think that it's how it will be best meeting your learning objectives, you can do it via Zoom. That's not that hard to do. And then you would need Zoom, but also if you're asking your students to submit these videos, you can do it in Box. So this came up a little bit on the previous presentation that we did, but somebody was mentioning that the integration with Box and Canvas, they didn't like it very much. And you don't have to use the Canvas Box integration if you don't want to. So I know that there's going to be a couple sessions on Box that you could attend. But one of the things that you could do is you could set up, a Box folder for each of the students and share directly with their email addresses. And then they will get an email notification. They'll be able to use that. Or you could have a whole classroom folder and then share with all students and then kind of create subfolders there. So those are a couple of options that you could do. And the other things, they can use Canvas assignments, which is a little more advanced if you have not used Canvas at all. But it works very well. So if you're thinking about group projects, here are a couple of recommendations. So students can collaborate synchronously. So they could use Zoom and they could connect with one another and they can kind of collaborate and work on their group projects. We're promoting Zoom just because SMU pays for it, but if they want to chat with one another, if they want to like text message with one another, FaceTime with one another, Google Hangout with one another, they could too. And they can still continue collaborating and do these group projects, but if they need to submit something, they can submit it digitally via email box or however it makes sense. But they also can collaborate asynchronously, so they don't have to do it at the same time, kind of via video conference. They could do it independently. And the tools that you would need is Zoom if you want to do synchronously, or you can do the Canvas collaborations, which is an integration with Google Docs. So Canvas, if you have the default kind of Canvas set up in your course, you will see that there's something called Canvas collaborations, and you can kind of create a collaboration that allows you to set up a Google Doc, and then multiple students can work on the same document at the same time. So that's one way they can think about it. They don't necessarily have to. It's like a wiki, right? Like they can also, everybody can edit, but they don't have to be doing that at the same time if they don't want to. But that's a wonderful tool that is available in Canvas depending on the activities that you have. Something to consider. The next one will be papers and essays. So we have a couple of recommendations here. So you can do online submissions, and you can do the email or box for that. And you can also use the Canvas assignment. So really easy. You can ask students to email you the papers, but putting into box or Canvas assignments is going to be better organized. Now for quizzes and exams, that's the thing that you need to really think about. And that's going to be usually more high stakes. So put a little more thought into this. You could think about take-home quizzes and exams. So instead of just having that simple multiple choice, quizzes and exams that they can easily find the answers in the book, maybe you try to find a little more like, authentic questions or authentic exam questions that are more application and kind of individualized, but you can also modify them to be open books. So it's something to consider. Like they might have access to their books, so kind of thinking about them using that as a resource, and maybe you're evaluating how they're synthesizing the information or applying that information to case study scenarios or something like that. That's one way that you can kind of think about quizzes and exams. But you can also think about alternate assignments as replacements. So you have like a few weeks now till the end of the term. So maybe having one super, high stakes exam at the end, you might change it to smaller things that they can turn it in, and you can provide them with feedback, so that they don't feel like pressured so much to do that exam. And it's easier for us to manage. So you can administer them online through Canvas, which it's great. If you have multiple choice questions, if you have fill in the blank questions, if you have matching questions, once you set up that in the Canvas system, those particular questions are automatically graded because you kind of set in the system the ones that it's correct. So the system kind of calculates automatically the grade for the students. And what we know from the literature in online learning, kind of immediate feedback is actually very good for learning. So you wouldn't be doing a disservice for them, and that kind of could help with you having to manage and grading everything at the end. The only thing that it might take some time to set it up. Now, you probably already have the questions, which that's what usually takes longer to figure out the questions that you're going to ask. But you're going to have to put it in the system, and that is not going to take that long. And after a while, you're going to get used to it, so that it's going to become like a mindless process. You can just put some music on and just input those questions in the system. There are some advanced features where you can kind of create question banks, and you can kind of tell the system to pull certain amount of questions from different banks. There are ways that we can kind of prevent academic dishonesty. So there are some tools that you can use in conjunction with the Canvas quizzes, something like the Respondus Lockdown Browser, which is an interesting tool. So the Respondus Lockdown Browser works like, Safari or Internet Explorer or Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox. So those are all browsers. So we have the Respondus Lockdown Browser. The students would download their browser in their computer, and they have to access their quizzes or exams through that tool. But in order for them to be able to access the quiz, they have to shut down every single other application that's running on their computers. And what I mean shut down is not minimize. I'm talking about they have to close their email applications. They need to close Microsoft Word. They have to close anything that's open in order for them to access the exam. And as they're taking the exam, they're not able to access those applications. They're not able to take like a screenshot of the exam. You can turn on what they call like this Respondus monitoring, like webcam monitoring. So as they're taking the exam, their webcams stay on, and it kind of tracks their eye motion. So if they're like going away from like where the camera is picking them up or kind of looking away, the system will kind of pick it up every time and creates kind of a report. So you can kind of see like a student has like a red bar is because like, they looked away several times. So you can go into the recording and see exactly what happened. Or it can do like an environment check. So they kind of like record the room that they're taking the exam in to show like there's not, other computers or other people or something. So there's some tools out there, especially if you're trying to administer the exams online, to kind of help you kind of minimize academic dishonesty. But if you're trying to do an open book exam or take home, you can just simply use email. They can just email their responses to you. Or you can also use Box. You can create a Box folder and upload that information there. That can be really easy to set up. Or you can use Canvas quizzes, and there's some trainings on Canvas quizzes that will be available for you. So those are a couple of things. So let me see if we have additional questions before we move to the next graphic, because the next graphic is like a lot of information. So let's see here. So we have Chris. Oh, let me see. So somebody has a question about attendance. So Carissa has a question. It's like, I would like to try to incentivize synchronous participation while not penalizing students who can actually participate in the Zoom lecture live. I'm wondering if there's a good strategies for that. So that is a great question. So one of the things that you could do is you could record the Zoom lecture. So the same way that we're doing this lecture right now, this is being recorded. Other people might be able to watch this later. So you could create then a discussion board in Canvas or something, or you can ask your students, hey, I'm going to post the lecture in Box, whatever. You need to watch it and then give some questions for them to answer. So especially if you have asked questions during the meeting and during the lecture, you can ask them to type it out, or you can create a discussion board and the students that were not able to attend can respond to those questions as part of the discussion board. That's one way that you could do that. Is that helpful, Carissa?
Yeah, so just to be clear, so you're saying you could create like a task for those students who are watching the video
Correct.
recording, which would be like slightly more onerous than participating live, and because I have I have a seminar style class, I want the students to be live if they can be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to hurt the students who can't be.
Yes, and understandable. So one of the things that, are you a Canvas user or are you open to using Canvas? Okay, so if you're open to using Canvas, when you're creating a discussion in Canvas, and you can even make that a graded discussion, there's a way for you to assign that discussion only to certain students. Okay. So you can put that under the participation category if you have assignment groups and you have a participation one, but only assign to those students that cannot attend on the synchronous meeting. So if you have, for instance, international students that, if you have a Spanish student or something that has gone back to Spain and they're going to be really off time zone wise, that they cannot attend your synchronous meeting, record it, create that discussion. You can place a link to the recording or embed the recording into the discussion instructions area, and then ask somebody guiding questions they want them to kind of, talk about or something. And then they will be able to kind of use the discussion board to kind of do their participation. So it's not ideal, right? It makes more sense that they would do it in person and synchronously. But once again, we're trying to address this the best way we can. And especially for some students, if they have strenuous situations that they cannot attend synchronously, we're trying to make accommodations and make sure they can still access the content and participate in as best as they can.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So we have a question from Chris. Even using lockdown browser, there is no way to be confident that students are not reviewing notes, using another device to look things up, and etc. The other concern for exam integrity is making sure that the person taking the quiz is actually the student. And Chris, I 100% agree with you. So this conversation about academic integrity in the online environment, of course, everybody talks about it, but even in face-to-face classes, there's never a 100% way to completely make sure that nobody's cheating, right? And so it's one of those things that the best thing that we can do is trust our students the best way we can. Like just, not completely doubt and assume that all students will cheat, and try to communicate with them. It's like, this is what we can do. Now, there are some strategies, right? So with the lockdown browser, you can, if you're doing the webcam monitoring, there is a way for you to make sure that the student taking the test is the student that registered for the class, because there is an ID check option that you can turn on. So before they can even access the quiz, they will have to show their SMU ID or a form of identification and take a picture of it, and then take a picture of their face. So it's kind of like one way-ish that you can kind of make sure that the person taking the exam. And if you have that webcam on, then they're the people that are most likely to be in front of the computer.
Right, but if
absolutely.
You have with the webcam, can that be set up where we don't have to go and watch 80 minutes of 100 students?
100%. So with the webcam monitoring, the way Respondus gives you a report is that there's like it's kind of like a bar by each of the students' profile. There's like kind of lines. And then if they have not looked away from the screen, it's green. And as they looked away more and more, it becomes orange or red. Okay. So you could only look at the recording for the ones that are on the orange or red side, and you can even look at specifically into like a specific time.
So it tags like specific moments that they're not looking to go over everything.
Yes. So because that will be extremely cumbersome for everybody to be looking all that stuff. So that's why they can put a little report. Okay. Now, there are some strategies, right, for you to kind of minimize academic dishonesty, especially with exams, with questions, right? There are ways that you can do. So if you make multiple choice tests or things that are like, from the book, yeah, it's easier for people to cheat on that stuff, right? But if you create questions that are a little more complex, that require them to kind of connect cognitively with the content in a higher level. So those, analysis, the syntheses, the evaluations, the creation of things, those are student products where they're less likely to cheat on, because you kind of have to know that stuff to be able to do it, right? So consider that, and that's why we're talking about, like, if you have that super, high stakes exam at the end of the term, like, maybe think about a different way that you do it, that it's not necessarily memorizing stuff, which technically only assesses lower level cognitive stuff, is the remembering, the identifying, right? Like, those are, if you think about the Bloom's taxonomy and how people engage with content, is only a lower level. Maybe we just tweak things, and maybe we do some higher level stuff, and maybe they can look at their books, because it's not going to be about memorizing specific, dates or something, but it's like making the bigger connections.
Right. And then going back to the department, trying to figure out recommendations for one person who's teaching 400 intro level, first year students in an intro psych, is going to be very different than teaching, 12 students in a senior seminar.
Absolutely.
It's trying to figure out what to recommend to different faculty in the department.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about. Like, this is a great time for us to actually capitalize on our community. So even on the previous session that we have with this content, and we're going to be jumping onto the Q&A session pretty soon, but we can really share some specific questions that you have about your course. And just the collective, if we can really engage with our SMU peers and get, ask what they're doing, I think this is a wonderful time, and we have that resource. A lot of people that have taught online or have been trained how to teach online actually teach online, not just, makeshift this online stuff. They have volunteered to kind of help people out and through the transition. So now is the time for us to capitalize on our community and help each other. So I think between the staff, we're going to have a lot of help, but other people too, like other faculty members, your peers, you're going to get a lot of help trying to figure this out too. So don't feel like you're alone. But yeah, it would take creativity. It would take looking at each course individually. More importantly is looking at the learning objectives, right? So we need to look at those main learning objectives for the course, and how can we get to those for each of these courses? And let's look at our student population. Based on our student population, those learning objectives, how can we achieve those goals? That's what we are. So we have a little graphic. It's going to be a little, intense on your screen, but bear with me. You're going to be following along, and it's going to make a little more sense. Oh, Canvas quizzes. But this one here. So as you are thinking of your exams and tests and activities, keep this graphic in mind, okay? So as we're moving forward, we need to think about this. So first of all, do you need to put your exam online? Let's start with that. If you say yes, you need to, before you say yes or no, you need to think about it. Have you achieved your course learning outcomes without the exam, okay? So if they have already been met through your midterm exam or a particular project that the students have already, presented to you, or if there was something, consider the reweight of your existing assessments and canceling that exam. We need to focus on the learning outcomes and the ones that we have not met yet for the term. That should be your process. But if you have not, so if you're here on the no, you need to think about potentially redesigning. Can you redesign? If you do, these are some ways here that you can really think about redesigning your exam. So could students do video presentations? Could they do reflection papers? Could we do culminating reading papers? So these are some strategies that you can think of to kind of substitute that. If you have to keep that exam, which you might say, I have to do it. That's the only way that I'm going to meet the learning objectives. I'll have these questions tried and true. It is what it is. So that's okay. It is not impossible to ensure academic integrity. So it's hard, but it's not impossible, and we can do the best we can. So if you're going to do that, we need to think about digitizing. That's the next step. So one easy way to think about it, you can even think of digitizing in two parts. You can separate the multiple choice, the fill in the blanks, the true or falses, And this, if you're using Canvas, that can be really helpful for you to manage your time when it comes to grading. Yes, it will take you some time to set it up. The system will grade that stuff automatically. So this can save you time later if you set it up in the system now. And you can think about short answers and essays, and they could be delivered in a different way. It doesn't have to be through the learning management system. The students can email it to you, they can send it to Box, or if you're comfortable, you can do it in Canvas. So these are a couple ways that you can just really think about your information and, you know, consider redesigning, because, you know, that way you're not going to be worrying about potentially students cheating on a particular exam if you're just rethinking the activity. So we're going to have a quick Q&A. So if you have specific questions about your course, now this is the time to ask them, and then we can kind of give you, kind of brainstorm together ways that you can kind of achieve the goals, and if you have that stuff in mind.
Carissa has a question about attendance.
Sure, go ahead, shoot.
Sure,
Carissa?
yeah. So the last question was, I guess, about participation specifically. This question is more about sort of attendance itself. And
Sure.
I'm curious about, and maybe I need to just let this idea go. Like, can I know that students have actually watched the lecture videos? Or do I just have to like sort of accept that they can, you know, turn them on and walk away and never hear any of the content? Like, how are there ways for me to ensure that they are actually seeing the lecture?
Yes.
And if so, what are those ways?
Yes. So one of the ways that you can do it, if you record your lecture, okay, so you could record it in Zoom, or you could record it using your mobile device. You can record it with, you know, a digital camera that you have. There are a couple ways that you can kind of require your students to watch and kind of keep track of that. So we have a tool called Panopto. Panopto is a video creation and management, video management tool that we have access to. And if you're a Canvas user, the way you access it is you, on your menu for your course, you see a link to Panopto. Panopto actually gives you some data analytics options. So if you put your video there, there is a way for you to see which of the students have watched the video, and kind of gives you some data analytics on the video. But if you think about teaching and classroom management stuff, it's another thing, like, do we really want to, like, how much time are we really going to try to be the big brother and look at those data analytics, right? The best way to really see, not just that the students are watching the video, but they're actually getting the concepts of the video, which I think that is what you're trying to get to, right? It doesn't really matter if they just watched it. We want to make sure that as they are watching, they're actually paying attention, they're processing that information.
Yeah.
So having something like those discussion boards, or you can even create a Canvas assignment, you can put the lecture in and pair it with an activity that allows them to use that information in the video for something else. And then they actually articulate their knowledge by completing a task. What I would say is, don't do that specific for every video, not necessarily rewatch it. Try to make sure that it always links back to the learning objectives of the course.
Sure.
So let's not just do that to do it, but let's do that because we're meeting those objectives, if it makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Okay, so the other option is we have another tool available on campus called Play Pause It. Play Pause It allows you to upload a video there, or it could be even a YouTube video, something from the internet that you have there. But as part of the video, you can kind of embed questions throughout the video. So as the students kind of press play, and then the video starts going, and then depending on how you programmed it, a question kind of pops up, and they have to answer the question before moving on to continue the video. So that's another tool that can be used to make sure that the students kind of watching the video is adding those little mini questions. And if you're using Play Pause It, you can kind of sync in the Play Pause It with an assignment where that grade then can be calculated as part of the student's grade.
Where is the Play Pause It? Is that?
So Play Pause It is actually under the assignments, and it should be under an external tool. So there is documentation about Play Pause It on the OIT website. So there's actually even videos on how to create a Play Pause It lesson and stuff. So if you go to if you just Google
Right.
SMU Play Pause It, you should get to the OIT website that has those videos.
Great.
And
I didn't know we had
spelled
that.
How?
Huh?
And that's spelled how?
Play Pause It, like play, and then POSIT,
Okay.
I think. Yeah. So these are the ways that you can kind of check to see if their students are actually looking at the video. So it's a little more advanced, right, technology-wise, but we have access to those tools, and those are tools that SMU has been already paying for. So, questions? Any other questions?
I have another question, but I don't want to hog the stage here.
Well, you can.
Please.
Okay.
These are helpful for all of us.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and hog it.
So I think this one probably is maybe more specific to me, which is,
Sure.
so I have a upcoming 1 week long in-class simulation. And I guess I'm trying to figure out whether it can be salvaged in some form that is not totally obnoxious for the students. And I'm going to give you the sort of I think the particular challenges. So it's a simulation where the students are in teams of 2.
Okay.
And they are simulating a UN Security Council negotiation. So there are 24 students in the class. We've got 12 teams of 2. If we were to do it in class, then it would involve the students, at least on the first day, basically in a free-for-all discussion where delegations would try to find other delegations with whom they could co-sponsor a resolution. And so it's kind of a scrum. I mean, people are just moving around the room, talking to whomever they want. The second day is a little bit more organized. You know, the co-sponsors present their proposals, and there's a vote. So I mean, I've thought about the possibility of trying to just create like some shell breakout rooms in Zoom where students could just like move around, but I just don't know realistically how likely it would be that would be a sort of efficient at all. Like, you know, how well both the delegation partners would be able to like communicate with each other about which other delegations they wanted to talk to, and then actually find the room that those people were in.
Yeah, so the one negative thing about the breakout rooms in Zoom is that you set them up and the students are not able to kind of move around from them. So you as the host or the main instructor, right? Yeah. You can break them down, but they cannot move around. And then you can kind of put them back together.
Yeah, so that's
so the one thing that they could do is they could use the chat option with Zoom, so the chat window, and they can kind of message other people. So my recommendation is that maybe the couples that are kind of the delegates, right, the groups of 2, they could be on their own mobile device kind of chatting with one another, or they could have like a chat window, whether it is, you know, just text messaging or another chat option that they're talking to one another as they're talking to the delegates, to kind of simulate that going in person to different, you know, to talk to them. Does that make sense?
And with the chat option via Zoom.
Zoom.
Right. So I mean, but with that option, do they have the capability to like have small group conversations that exclude some, like, you know, I guess, because the idea here would be that like, say 2 teams might want to have a little private conversation about their strategy with each other.
Yeah,
and then bring it to other teams or something late, you know, but
they have the option of messaging people directly. That's what I was saying. Like, they probably would have to have a side chat with their buddies, with the person that is in the group with them. But we can try to maybe achieve this with other tools. Maybe not necessarily the Zoom chat room, but maybe we can try to set up with a different, like, maybe there's something like a free tool that we can kind of use online that could allow you to meet the same goals. I think that everything can be done. It just takes a little more creativity.
Yeah, well, and part of the question is that, like, is the workaround so difficult as to make the effort pointless?
Yeah,
Or do I just need to drop this assignment?
Maybe you don't have to drop that particular assignment. Maybe we just need to think about the different stages of the assignment and drop the ones that will be more complicated to do and set it up than to actually do the assignment itself. And maybe we just rethink those. There are certain things that for sure they can do. So for instance, the activities that you say they usually do on the day 2, like they're presenting their case, whatever, they can easily do that. So we just need to look at the different stages of that particular project in the simulation and say, like, what cannot be done at all in Zoom? So let's rethink that particular component. So, you know, in class, you allow them to kind of walk around. They're not going to have that freedom in the online environment, but maybe there's a way for us to think about that stage in a different way, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe just to have some sort of tool that would just allow them to sort of communicate with each other in small groups of their choosing.
Because I mean, they could use
even maybe rather letting go of this idea that it all has to happen within an hour and 20 minutes.
Exactly. So maybe
a space where they could all, like, where different teams could meet up with other teams,
which they can. So
time.
The students could do it in Zoom. So the students have access to Zoom accounts as well. So instead of doing in that hour and a half that you have for the class, maybe you wouldn't meet that day, and they would give them 3 days to kind of coordinate with other people. And you can create maybe a timeline, and like you can even put it in Canvas, like where students can go and set up the times that they can meet and when, and then they can share Zoom links for those meetings, you know? And so it just takes a little ingenuity and creativity, but it is going to be a little bit different. But yes, you can achieve the same goals. So maybe you just give them a little more time to complete this, because they are going to have to, you know, it depends on how many groups you want them to talk to, like how many other delegates you want these groups to talk to.
Well, that's the challenge here, is that theoretically each team of 2 needs the opportunity to speak to any other possible combination of teams of 2.
Yeah. And how many do you have again? 12?
12 teams of 2. And theoretically any pair might need to talk to any other pair or multiple sets of pairs.
So that's maybe we create so we could create some kind of Canvas page. So do you know that in Canvas pages you can change it so that the faculty and the students can edit, so it becomes kind of a wiki?
Yeah.
So we can kind of set up a grid or a table where students can put in the available times or create different Zoom links, or they can sign up for different times that they can talk to one another there. Yeah. So instead of just giving an hour and a half for them to do that, maybe it's a longer time. Maybe it's like different days or something, so we can accommodate maybe people that are in different time zones. But we can set that up in the system. We just have to be a little more creative about it. But then things can move on as planned for that second stage of the simulation. Yeah. So does that make sense? Is that like helpful? Yeah. But don't feel like you cannot do it. I think that you can. It's just when you need to sit down and really think about that. But I already kind of have some ideas. But setting up a grid where they can put in the different times they can meet, and maybe the Zoom link for those meetings, and they tell you who they're meeting with, so that you can go and jump in some of these meetings if you would like to or not.
Yeah, because part of that is I would be evaluating their participation in the simulation. Yeah.
You can also ask them to record them. So maybe you're not going to be looking at every single one of those recordings, but for each of those groups of 2, you're going to pick one recording to watch. Yeah. So maybe that's what they have to do. At their own time, they have to set up a time to meet up with a different group of delegates and record that meeting and submit it to you. And you can say this should be like, 5 to 10 minutes or however much you would give to them in class, you know?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So changing topics a little bit, Adeline, is it a situation where I've read some things online that talked about, with some of the lockdown browsers and that kind of stuff, issues with, requiring students to have webcams on? Are there issues around that?
So the issues would be potentially if the students don't have a webcam, right? So you kind of need to have a webcam. But you talk about just privacy issues in general?
As well, yes.
Yeah.
Those were the two aspects. One was the physically having, the other was the privacy aspects.
Yeah. So, so physically having, so that's one thing about accessibility. Like, some students just might not have a webcam at their homes. They just might not have it. They might be able to attend it, but then they might not have a microphone in their homes, right? With
Right.
Zoom, you can kind of call in with your phone. And, but the other thing,
the testing environment more than the lecturing environment.
Yeah. So the thing is, I think that the conversations about privacy are bigger conversations about privacy in general. If you feel that you are uncomfortable asking your students to do that webcam monitoring, you can disable. That is not a default thing. The default lockdown browser does not include the webcam monitoring. For you to do the webcam monitoring, you have to check another box in addition to the regular lockdown. So if you feel uncomfortable recording your students, or if you're thinking about their privacy in some way, you don't have to require that. And you just do the browser itself, which will limit the applications that they will have open as they're taking the exams. And it will not allow them to take a screen cap, I guess, a screenshot of the exam.
Okay.
Does that address your question?
It starts me down the path. I'm trying to figure out how to create something where essentially I would be able to recognize the existing time period. It's a 50-minute class. Get something to them where they then have the ability to see the problem appear. So maybe it's a document that's emailed to them at the beginning of the 50-minute period or whatever. Have different information given to every student. Clearly can be done using something like a mail merge or whatever. Have them at the end of that 50-minute period return it back to me, so that is, maybe it's a requirement of, okay, you're required to take a photo that includes the work you did solving this and the information that I emailed you. And I've got something set up as a spreadsheet or whatever, where I input the 5 numbers that were the variables in your problem. I can see what your answer is. I can grade it. Across 150 students, clearly this is a nightmare. But nevertheless, it's the nightmare I'm living in. So
yeah. And something to consider too, the lockdown browser only works for Canvas quizzes. So what you're describing,
I recognize I've got sitting in front of me right now a laptop, an iPad, a cell phone, and a desktop. So clearly, I don't consider a lockdown browser to be the solution to this, just simply because I cannot assume that you're locked down. I cannot assume who's with you, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, and it's not that I'm trying to assume that everybody's a cheat. My actual bigger goal is to protect the students who aren't cheating,
which is the majority.
Yes. So let me tell you one example that actually came out of this kind of Q&A part of the session for the previous session. So there was a particular instructor that he was like, I have these problems that the students have to solve, and like I want to limit academic dishonesty, and how can I do this? So one of the suggestions that came out of this is that you can say, you're giving the specific allotted time for students to complete the problems. And then you can say at the end of this specific time that I'm giving you, I'm going to select about 1/3 of the class, and we're going to have to connect in Zoom, and you're going to have to explain to me your problems. So you're going to have to explain to me how you actually came up with that answer.
Okay.
So that's kind of a way that psychologically you can kind of put the fear of God in them. It's like, I have to know how to do this stuff because, if I got it right, I need to explain how I got it right.
That's a nice idea. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So this came out of a couple of other professors. I think it was like Steven Sikula from physics, and there was another professor from, I forgot his department.
That's fine.
So that's something to consider, is that, you don't want to be looking at every single one of those students taking the exam, but maybe you can pick a few or a handful of them and kind of follow up with them so that everybody kind of is on their toes,
I believe strongly in threats, so I like that.
There we go. It's one way. Okay, any other questions?
Hey, Addie. I
Yeah.
have a question, and I actually just faced this technical issue when I was joining this session. So
Mm-hmm.
there were three of us, we were in a room, and it said that, it was this session, and it said that the host is busy in another session. And for 15 minutes, we were in that room without a host. And that's when I emailed Jennifer, and, she gave me a link. I clicked on it, and then I was able to join. So my concern is, can this happen, during regular like class hours? Do you know what had happened, or if there is some, like number, like, participant number beyond that, it's kicking people out or something like that?
No, so if was it for this particular session?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so what might have happened was earlier this morning, we had different links for this session. The links had originally been created by Jennifer Culver, but she also created the links for my sessions and her sessions because I was out of the country and I didn't have access to do this stuff as I was out of the country. So the problem that we have after this morning's session is that because she created both sessions that were running concurrently, Zoom did not have the capacity to record both, if that makes sense. You're only supposed to record one at a time. So we had to then basically create new Zoom links and we replaced it on the website. So the issue that you might have had is that you might have had the older link, which is also something with Jennifer running a session at the same time. Okay. And we just had to replace it. So it was a human issue, not necessarily a technology issue.
Okay.
So I don't think you're going to see that again, but we replaced it, I would say, probably around like 1:30-ish p.m. So it should be fine. Like if you go to that training page now and you click on those links, those are the links that are going to actually go to my future sessions. But we had that double thing that happened in the morning and we kind of had to fix it. But that was a human issue, not a technology one.
Okay. Because, that's what I was thinking. If this is the case, I don't know how to kind of,
Yeah, no, this is human issue. But it had, as soon as that session was over, we were able to identify it and we try to fix it, as quickly as possible. So we apologize for that.
Oh, no problem. Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, before we move on, so I have this Kim comment teach on, right? So what I want you guys to know is that we're all in the same boat. We are, this is a novel situation for all of us. We are trying to support you as much as possible. Do not feel like you're alone in this. We are trying to put as many resources out there online to cater to you. Soon after we're done with these 2 days of intense trainings, we might be able to just resume our one-on-one consultations so we can really take a look at your courses individually. But I think this is a really opportune time for us to really kind of bank on our community. Get in touch with your departments and the folks in your department. Try to do a Zoom meeting with them. Share resources. There's a lot of ways that we can collaborate electronically as we are self-quarantining or isolating ourselves. Also, this is a really opportune time for us to rethink about our courses, even for the future. A lot of this technology stuff, yes, will take some time for you to learn, but it's a great opportunity for you to model lifelong learning to your students. They know that you guys are training and doing the best that you can and trying to learn these new technologies and new things. So I know that this will be very much appreciated for your students. And as much as we can, we're going to be supporting you. Do not feel that you're alone in this, because you're not. And we are confident that you're able to do this. Just focus on the smaller stuff. Focus on those learning objectives that have been listed for your course. Let's make sure that we meet them. Let's focus on these next couple of weeks. And then in the next couple of weeks, we'll address it, what's going to come ahead. But don't feel overwhelmed, because we're here to support you, okay? And if you have any additional questions, you can go to the website, the smu.edu, keep teaching. We're updating them with resources as we go. We're going to put the recordings for these sessions on. So if you have missed a previous session, or if you have some kind of commitment in the afternoon that you cannot attend them, those recordings will be there. We're right now kind of limiting our one-on-one consultations because we're trying to, address as many people as possible in these sessions. So if you have any questions, just email it, do a ticket to help@smu.edu, and that's how we're getting our requests. And the requests will be kind of spread out and send to the appropriate staff member that can help you with them. But we just want to make sure that you feel supported, and we can do this. We're here for you, okay? And do you guys have any questions, or you're good? If we're good, we'll let you go, and then we'll keep in touch.
Can I just follow up with you individually
Yes.
about the simulation problem?
Absolutely.
Or should I go through the help at SMU?
You can follow up with me. Just send me an email. I might not be able to kind of respond and kind of actually sit down virtually with you until probably Friday. But send me a message directly. So Tolliver@smu.edu, because I have that in my head now. And I'm already thinking about we can do this. So
all right, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, bye guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.